Story number 1. Whispers of Black Hollow. I never intended to stay in Black Hollow, Montana. It was supposed to be a quick stop on my cross-country journey, a place to refuel both my car and my restless mind. But as I soon discovered, some towns aren't meant to be just passing through. The first thing that struck me about Black Hollow was the perpetual twilight. Nestled deep within the dense Montana forests, the town seemed to be swallowed by shadows, with thick, unyielding fog that clung to the ground like a heavy blanket. The trees towered overhead, their branches intertwining to block out the sun, casting long, eerie silhouettes across the narrow, winding streets. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, a combination that should have been soothing but felt oppressive instead. With a population of barely 50, Black Hollow felt more like a forgotten relic than a living community. The houses were quaint, made of old timber that creaked and groaned with every gust of wind. Each home seemed to carry its own story, with shutters that hung crooked and gardens that were overgrown, hinting at the lives of the people who once tended them. Windows were often dark, and rarely did I see anyone moving about during the day. It was as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sky already tinged with the dusky colors of impending night. The only sounds were the distant hoot of an owl and the rustling of leaves stirred by the persistent breeze. I pulled into the only gas station, its sign swinging slightly as if beckoning me inside. The place looked like it hadn't changed in decades, with old posters peeling from the walls and a cash register that seemed to have seen better days. The attendant, an older man with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes, gave me a nod. "Welcome to Black Hollow," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made my skin crawl. "Not many pass through here." I chuckled nervously, trying to mask my unease. "Just passing through. Heading to Seattle." He nodded again, but there was something unsettling in his gaze. "Safe travels." I grabbed some snacks and a map, thanking him before heading out. As I walked back to my car, I noticed the houses lining the street were eerily silent. No lights were on, no signs of life. It was as if the town was a ghost town, abandoned and forgotten by time. The few people I saw glanced briefly in my direction before quickly looking away, their faces pale and eyes hollow. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The darkness outside was almost tangible, pressing in on all sides. The trees seemed to close in, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to trap me. I decided to stay the night in the local motel, the only one in town. The building was old but clean, with a faded sign that read Black Hollow and above the entrance. The lobby was dimly lit, furnished with worn-out chairs and a reception desk that looked like it hadn't seen a polish in years. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, checked me in without a word. My room was small but comfortable, with a single bed, a wooden dresser, and a window that offered a view of the surrounding woods. I tried to settle in, but sleep eluded me. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling and the distant howling of the wind. Around midnight, I was awakened by the sound of soft crying. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but the sound persisted, low and sorrowful, coming from outside my window. I strained my ears, trying to locate the source. The crying seemed to be coming from the direction of the forest. My heart pounded in my chest as I lay there, listening to the haunting melody of grief that seemed to seep into my very bones. Curiosity got the better of me. I slipped out of bed and quietly opened the window. The air was cold, and the darkness was thick. I could just make out the silhouette of trees swaying gently in the wind. I listened, and the crying grew louder, more distinct. It sounded like children, small voices full of anguish that echoed through the night. I decided to investigate. Grabbing a flashlight, I stepped out into the night. The fog was even denser here, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. The crying guided me deeper into the woods, each step taking me further away from the safety of the motel. The beam of my flashlight danced across the trees, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. The path was barely visible, overgrown with shrubs and tangled roots that seemed to reach out to trip me up. The cries of the children were now accompanied by faint whispers, voices overlapping in a cacophony of despair. My skin prickled with unease, and a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that unseen eyes were watching my every move. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood an old, dilapidated playground. The swings moved on their own, swaying back and forth without any visible force. The crying was louder here, emanating from the empty slide and the broken merry-go-round. The playground looked as though it had been abandoned for years, the paint peeling and the metal corroded by time and neglect. Suddenly, I saw her, a figure in a flowing white dress, standing at the edge of the playground. Her presence was both haunting and mesmerizing. She turned to face me, and I felt an icy chill run down my spine. Her eyes were hollow, void of any warmth or life. Her hair flowed freely, dancing in an unseen breeze, and her dress seemed to shimmer with an ethereal light that contrasted sharply with the surrounding darkness. "You will never leave," she whispered, her voice echoing through the trees like a mournful wind. Her words sent a shiver through me, freezing me in place. I tried to speak, but my throat felt tight, my voice lost in the oppressive atmosphere. Before I could react, the ground beneath me seemed to shift. I felt a force pulling me downward, a sensation of being dragged through thick mud. My vision blurred, and everything went black. When I awoke, I was lying in the forest, the morning sun piercing through the canopy. My neck was throbbing, and I reached up to find deep, bruised handprints pressing into my skin, purple stains that seemed to seep into my flesh. Panic surged through me as I tried to stand, but my legs felt weak, as if the forest itself was holding me captive. I staggered back to Black Hollow, but the town had changed. The houses were now menacing shadows, and the air was thick with an oppressive silence. The few residents I encountered avoided my gaze, their eyes filled with fear and sorrow. It was as though the entire town was ensnared in a collective nightmare, their spirits broken by an unseen force. Desperate to escape, I fled to the motel, only to find it abandoned. The front desk was covered in dust, and my room was empty, no sign of where I had been staying. It was as if time itself had warped, trapping me in a loop of darkness and despair. I wandered the halls, calling out for help, but my voice echoed back at me, bouncing off the walls in a mocking refrain. Days turned into weeks, and I wandered the haunted streets of Black Hollow, searching for a way out. The cries of the children haunted my every step, and the woman in white appeared in my dreams, her whisper a constant reminder of my entrapment. Sleep offered no respite, only more visions of the clearing and her sorrowful gaze. I tried to seek help, but every attempt to leave the town ended in the same eerie way. Cars wouldn't start, roads seemed to lead me in circles, and every path I took led me back to the heart of Black Hollow. It was as if the town itself was a living entity, intent on keeping me within its grasp. The residents, though few, were tight-lipped and guarded, their interactions with me curt and filled with unspoken fear. One evening, driven by desperation, I decided to delve deeper into the town's history. I visited the small library, a building that looked as old as the town itself. The librarian, an elderly woman with a solemn demeanor, greeted me silently. Her eyes, though tired, held a depth of sorrow that mirrored my own. I spent hours poring over old newspapers and town records. Black Hollow had always been a quiet place, but there were whispers of tragedy. Decades ago, a series of unexplained disappearances had plagued the town. Children would vanish without a trace, and no one ever found out what happened to them. The townsfolk, though small in number, were tight-knit, but fear had always lingered in their hearts. One article caught my eye. It spoke of a woman named Eliza Hart, who had lost her children to a mysterious illness. Consumed by grief, she had taken her own life, and it was said that her spirit never left Black Hollow. Some believed her sorrow had twisted into something malevolent, haunting the town and the surrounding forest. Her story resonated with the whispers I'd heard and the haunting presence that seemed to follow me everywhere. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps understanding the source of the haunting could help me escape. That night, I returned to the clearing where I had first encountered the woman in white. The playground was silent, the swings motionless. I sat on the cold, rusty slide and began to speak aloud, recounting the story of Eliza Hart. The air grew heavy, and the temperature dropped. A soft sobbing filled the clearing, and the figure in white appeared once more. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice trembling but determined. Eliza's eyes softened for a moment before the hollow gaze returned. "They never left," she whispered. "They are lost, just like me." I took a deep breath. I want to help. Let me help you find peace. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the crying of the children grew louder, surrounding me. I closed my eyes, focusing on Eliza's pain and sorrow. I understand your grief. Let me help you let go. Memories of the rituals I had read about in old books flooded my mind. I remembered reading that offering something of personal value could bridge the gap between the living and the dead. Desperate, I rummaged through my belongings and found a small, silver locket, an heirloom from my grandmother. It was the only thing I had left that connected me to my past, a tangible piece of home amidst the encroaching darkness. I placed the locket on the ground and began to chant the words I had memorized. The air shimmered, and the figure of Eliza seemed to waver, her form becoming less defined. The cries of the children melded into a harmonious melody, and a warm light enveloped the clearing, pushing back the shadows that had long dominated the space. Eliza, I called softly, please find peace. Let your children rest. The spirit reached out a hand, touching the locket. A surge of energy flowed through me, and I felt a profound sense of release. The oppressive darkness lifted, and the fog began to dissipate. The playground no longer felt menacing but serene, bathed in the soft glow of dawn breaking through the trees. When I opened my eyes, the clearing was bathed in the soft glow of dawn. Eliza stood before me, her expression no longer sorrowful but peaceful. Thank you, she whispered before fading into the light, along with the spirits of her children. The air felt lighter, and the weight that had held me captive seemed to lift. I felt a gentle breeze and knew that the town was finally free from the curse that had held it captive for so long. The path out of Black Hollow was clear, the roads unbroken by the malevolent force that had once ensnared me. I packed my things and drove away, the town shrinking in my rearview mirror, the shadows retreating as the sun climbed higher into the sky. Weeks passed, and life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such an ordeal. The gas station attendant greeted me warmly one morning, as if we had never been apart. Safe travels, he said with a genuine smile, the weariness in his eyes replaced by a sense of relief. As I continued my journey to Seattle, I couldn't help but reflect on my time in Black Hollow. The experience had changed me, leaving me with a deeper understanding of grief and the lingering echoes of the past. The mark on my neck, a reminder of the ordeal, faded over time, but the memories remained vivid, etched into my mind like scars that refused to fade. Even now, years later, I sometimes hear whispers in the wind, especially on quiet nights. They're soft, almost imperceptible, but I recognize them as echoes from Black Hollow. Sometimes, when the moon is high and the night is still, I feel a presence watching me, a reminder that some places, and some spirits, never truly fade away. The stories of Black Hollow have become a part of my own, a testament to the thin veil between the living and the dead, and the enduring power of compassion and understanding. Black Hollow remains a mystery, tucked away in the vast Montana wilderness. Travelers still pass through, unaware of the town's haunted past. The story of Eliza Hart and her lost children became a local legend, a cautionary tale about grief and the thin veil between the living and the dead. Some say the town still holds onto its secrets, waiting for the next lost soul to stumble into its embrace, but I believe that with each story told and each spirit set free, the shadows of Black Hollow grow a little less dark. As for me, I carry the lessons of Black Hollow with me. I've learned that understanding and compassion can bridge even the deepest divides, and that sometimes, to find peace, we must confront our darkest fears and reach out a hand to those who linger in the shadows. The road ahead is long, and while the memories of Black Hollow may never fully fade, they serve as a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring hope that even in the darkest places, light can find its way through. Story number 2. Dead End Road. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon as I rolled my 18-wheeler onto the gravel path that locals ominously referred to as Dead End Road. My name is Jack Mitchell, and for the past 15 years, I've hauled goods across America's highways, weathering every storm and navigating every detour. But nothing in my career had prepared me for the eerie silence and creeping dread that awaited me on this forgotten stretch of Nevada desert. I'd been driving from Las Vegas to Phoenix, a route I'd taken countless times without incident. However, that day, traffic was a nightmare, and my manager had insisted I take an alternate route to avoid the bottleneck on Interstate 15. It's just a few extra miles, he had assured me over the phone. but as I glanced at my GPS, the voice had a nervous edge. Dead End Road, it repeated, as if reluctant to acknowledge the name. The road was a narrow, gravel-laden path flanked by towering cacti and rugged desert terrain. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, the fading light casting long shadows that danced with the wind. I turned on my high beams, hoping to cut through the encroaching darkness, but the thickening shadows seemed to absorb the light, swallowing it whole. As I drove deeper into the desert, the landscape grew desolate. There were no signs of civilization, no gas stations, no houses, not even a flicker of movement. Just endless stretches of sand and scrub brush under a sky that was rapidly turning pitch black. My radio crackled with static, offering no solace or company, just the oppressive silence of isolation. An hour into the drive, the temperature began to drop sharply. The oppressive heat of the day gave way to the chill of night, and the desert transformed into a landscape of darkness and uncertainty. I wrapped my jacket tighter around me, pulling my cap lower to shield my eyes from the glare of my headlights reflecting off the sand. That's when I saw her. A figure stood in the middle of the road, illuminated by the eerie glow of my headlights. She was a woman, dressed in a flowing white dress that seemed out of place in the rugged desert. Her long hair cascaded down her back, catching the light in a way that made her appear almost spectral. She was motionless, but her eyes were fixed on me, wide and pleading. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowed the truck to a stop. I couldn't see her clearly, but something about her presence sent a shiver down my spine. Was she lost? Or was it something more sinister? I grabbed the side mirror and tried to make out her features better. Her face was pale, almost translucent, with deep-set eyes that seemed to hold centuries of sorrow. She raised a hand, her fingers trembling as if begging for help. "Please, help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. I stepped out of the cab, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. The night air was cold, biting at my skin and making me pull my jacket tighter. As I approached her, the woman remained silent, her gaze never wavering. I extended a hand, hoping to offer some form of comfort or assistance, but the moment our hands were inches apart, she vanished. I stood there, heart racing, staring into the darkness where she had just been. For a moment, everything was silent, the only sound the distant howl of a coyote and the rustling of the desert breeze. Then, an unsettling sound broke the stillness, a low, echoing laughter that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath me. I spun around, searching for the source of the sound, but there was nothing, just the endless expanse of desert stretching out in every direction. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. Had I imagined it? A trick of the light? Or was there something more at play on Dead End Road? Shaking off the unease, I returned to my truck, determined to put the strange encounter behind me. I started the engine, the familiar rumble a small comfort in the unnerving silence. As I pulled back onto the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her standing there once more. But there was nothing, just the empty desert stretching out behind me. I drove on, the minutes ticking by with agonizing slowness. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every gust of wind whispered threats I couldn't understand. My mind kept drifting back to the woman in white, her sorrowful eyes haunting my thoughts. Was she a ghost? A spirit trapped on this forsaken road, unable to find peace? As midnight approached, the desert seemed to come alive with sounds that defied explanation. Whispers echoed through the stillness, and the laughter returned, louder and more insistent this time. I tried to focus on the road, but my vision blurred, fatigue setting in from hours of monotonous driving and the unnerving events of the evening. I knew I should turn back, head towards the relative safety of the interstate, but something kept me moving forward, an invisible force pushing me deeper into the heart of the desert. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as the road ahead seemed to twist and bend, leading me into an abyss of darkness and uncertainty. Then, out of nowhere, the headlights illuminated an old, dilapidated gas station standing alone amidst the vast expanse of sand and rocks. It looked abandoned, windows shattered, and doors hanging off their hinges. My heart skipped a beat as I considered pulling over, hoping to find some semblance of civilization or at least a place to rest. I approached the station cautiously, the gravel crunching under my tires. The sign above the entrance swayed in the wind, creaking ominously. I parked the truck and stepped out, the cold night air biting at my face. As I walked towards the building, the laughter grew louder, almost mocking in its persistence. The door to the gas station swung open with a force that seemed too strong for a place that appeared abandoned. Inside, the remnants of a bygone era lay scattered, broken glass, rusted pumps, and faded posters peeling from the walls. The air was thick with dust, making each breath a struggle. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" My voice echoed through the empty building, but there was no response, only the eerie laughter that seemed to surround me, coming from all directions at once. I stepped further inside, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the darkness. The store was a mess, items strewn about as if someone had left in a hurry. Shelves were empty, and the counter was littered with debris. As I moved towards the back of the store, I noticed a door slightly ajar, leading to what looked like an office. I pushed the door open and shone my light inside. The room was cluttered with old files and a dusty desk lamp, long since burnt out. On the desk lay an old photograph, its edges yellowed and torn. I picked it up, squinting to make out the faded image. It was a family, a man, a woman, and 2 children, smiling happily in front of the gas station. A sense of melancholy washed over me as I realized this place had once been a hub of life, now reduced to a ghostly shell. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and a chill ran down my spine. The laughter intensified, now interspersed with whispers that seemed to call my name. I turned around, but there was no one there. Panic began to set in as I realized I might be trapped in some sort of supernatural loop. I rushed out of the office, back into the main store, and bolted the door behind me. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what was happening. I needed to get back to my truck, back to safety. But as I turned to leave, the ground beneath me began to tremble, and the lights flickered on and off, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the walls. The laughter turned into cries, desperate, sorrowful wails that pierced my ears and threatened to shatter my sanity. I stumbled towards the exit, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if the building itself was closing in on me, trapping me within its haunted confines. Desperation took hold, and I pounded on the door, shouting for help. "Let me out! Please!" But my pleas were met with silence, the only response the relentless cries of the spirits that seemed to inhabit the place. In a last-ditch effort, I turned to the photograph I'd found earlier. Maybe there was a clue, some way to appease whatever was holding me captive. I held it up, hoping for some sign, but the image remained blank, the faces now erased as if someone had tried to wipe them away. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, the woman in white, standing at the entrance of the store. Her presence was both beautiful and terrifying, her eyes empty yet filled with an unimaginable sorrow. She raised a hand, pointing towards the door, a silent plea that I couldn't ignore. Summoning every ounce of courage, I pushed against the door again, and this time, it gave way. I didn't hesitate. Bursting out of the gas station, I sprinted towards my truck, the laughter and cries fading behind me as I fled into the night. I jumped into the cab, heart pounding, and started the engine. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see her standing there, but there was nothing, just the empty desert stretching out behind me. Relief washed over me, but the sense of dread lingered, a constant reminder of the horrors I'd faced on Dead End Road. I didn't stop until the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert. My truck was found. Later that day, sitting alone in the middle of the sand, with no sign of me. The authorities were baffled, no tracks, no clues, nothing to explain my disappearance. They chalked it up to a tragic accident, but I knew the truth. Dead End Road was no ordinary path, it was a gateway to something far more sinister, a place where lost souls wandered, trapped in an eternal nightmare. Weeks turned into months, and life slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy. But the memory of that night haunted me, a relentless specter that refused to fade. Friends and family thought I was missing, lost to the unforgiving desert, but deep down, I knew I was still trapped in that cursed place, forever searching for a way out. I tried to move on, to bury the experience deep within my subconscious, but the desert called to me in my dreams. Visions of the woman in white and the haunted gas station plagued my nights, reminding me that Dead End Road was never truly done with me. It was as if the road had claimed a part of my soul, binding me to its dark legacy. Years passed, and I became a cautionary tale among truckers and locals alike. Stories of dead-end roads spread, each retelling adding layers to the mystery and fear. Some claimed to hear the laughter echoing through the night, others spoke of seeing ghostly apparitions on the road. But for me, the truth was painfully clear. I was one of them now, a lost soul wandering the endless expanse of the Nevada desert. In moments of clarity, I contemplated escaping, finding a way to break free from the road's malevolent grip. I delved into research, uncovering old legends and folklore that hinted at rituals and sacrifices needed to appease the spirits that roamed dead-end road. I sought out anyone who might have knowledge of the supernatural, desperate for a solution. One night, driven by a flicker of hope, I decided to return to the very place that had ensnared me. With a mixture of fear and determination, I navigated my truck back onto dead-end road, the gravel crunching beneath my tires like the beating of a heart. The desert was as desolate as I remembered, the oppressive silence broken only by the distant howl of a coyote. As I drove deeper into the darkness, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to shift and move with a life of their own. The road twisted and turned, leading me to the very spot where I had first encountered the woman in white. My hands trembled as I parked the truck, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. I stepped out, the cold night air biting at my skin. The laughter echoed once more, louder and more insistent, guiding me towards the abandoned gas station. I approached cautiously, the memory of my previous encounter fueling my resolve. This time, I wasn't alone, armed with knowledge and a desperate desire to reclaim my soul. I was determined to confront whatever haunted dead-end road. Inside the gas station, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The air felt charged, every breath a struggle against the overwhelming presence that filled the space. I moved towards the office, holding a talisman I had found during my research, a small charm believed to protect against malevolent spirits. I placed the charm on the desk, repeating the incantations I had memorized, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. The temperature plummeted, and the laughter transformed into anguished cries, the spirits of the lost souls reacting to my attempt to break the curse. The photograph I had found years ago reappeared, the faces of the family now clearly visible, their eyes pleading for release. Suddenly, the woman in white appeared, her form more defined than ever, her eyes still empty but now filled with a glimmer of hope. "Help us," she whispered, her voice a blend of sorrow and desperation. I continued the ritual, chanting louder, my resolve unwavering. The spirits began to converge, their forms swirling around me in a vortex of light and shadow. The ground beneath me trembled, the very fabric of reality bending under the weight of their collective anguish. With one final, powerful incantation, I felt a surge of energy, a force that pushed back against the darkness. The spirits let out a unified cry, their forms dissipating into the night, their lingering pain finally finding peace. The air cleared, and the oppressive silence was replaced by a sense of calm and liberation. The woman in white approached me, her presence no longer menacing but filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her form beginning to fade. "Now, we can rest." As she vanished, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the desert. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a sense of freedom that I hadn't known since that fateful night. The truck, once again, stood alone in the middle of dead-end road, but this time, it felt different, no longer a prison, but a symbol of triumph over the darkness. I climbed back into my truck, the memories of my ordeal etched into my mind like scars that refused to fade. As I drove away from dead-end road, the desert stretched out before me, vast and unforgiving, yet somehow less menacing than before. The road behind me seemed to dissipate, swallowed by the morning light, leaving no trace of the horrors that had once claimed so many souls. Life eventually moved on, and I resumed my career as a trucker, the experience on dead-end road becoming a story I shared with weary ears during long hauls. It served as a reminder of the thin veil between our world and the unknown, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unspeakable terror. But every so often, on quiet nights under a blanket of stars, I'd catch a whisper on the wind, a faint echo of laughter or a sorrowful plea, and I'd remember the woman in white and the endless expanse of the Nevada desert. Dead-end road had left an indelible mark on my soul, a story of survival and redemption that I carried with me, a haunting legacy of the night I faced the darkness and emerged into the light. Story number 3. Whispers of the Redwood. I never imagined that a weekend getaway with friends would turn into a nightmare etched into my very soul. The redwood forest in Oregon has always held a mystique that drew adventurers and nature lovers alike. Towering giants stretched toward the heavens, their ancient canopies weaving together to obscure the sky, creating a sanctuary of shadows and whispers. But that night, beneath the colossal trees, the forest revealed a darkness that no map could chart and no guide could warn me about. It was early June when my friends and I decided to embark on a camping trip deep into the heart of the redwood forest. The allure of disconnecting from our hectic lives and immersing ourselves in nature's grandeur was irresistible. We were 5, Sarah, Mike, Jenna, Alex, and me, bonded by years of friendship and shared adventures. Armed with tents, sleeping bags, and enough supplies to last a week, we set out with high spirits and eager anticipation. The first day was everything we had hoped for. Hiking trails led us through breathtaking landscapes, each step revealing more of the forest's majestic beauty. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and earth, and the sounds of wildlife created a symphony that felt both serene and invigorating. As evening approached, we reached our chosen campsite, a small clearing surrounded by ancient redwoods, their trunks thick and imposing, their branches intertwining like the arms of old friends. Setting up camp was a breeze. We pitched our tents, gathered firewood, and settled around the crackling fire, sharing stories and laughter under a sky littered with stars. The night was calm, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the distant call of an owl. Exhausted from the day's exertions, we retired to our tents, lulled by the comforting embrace of the forest. Sleep was elusive that first night. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the darkness pressing in from all sides. I lay awake, listening to the gentle breathing of my friends inside their tents, the fire's glow casting flickering shadows that danced on the tent walls. It was a peaceful slumber that was abruptly shattered the next night. The second evening unfolded similarly to the first. We hiked a bit further, exploring a different trail, and returned to our campsite just as dusk began to settle. After dinner, we sat around the fire, the conversation flowing easily as we recounted the day's adventures. The night air was cooler this time, and the forest seemed more alive, every rustle and snap of a twig amplified in the stillness. Around midnight, a heavy silence fell over the campsite. The usual nighttime sounds seemed to fade, replaced by an oppressive quiet that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was then that I first heard it, a deep, rhythmic breathing, slow and deliberate, emanating from all around us. At first, I dismissed it as the wind playing tricks, rustling through the dense foliage. But the breathing grew louder, more pronounced, as if someone, or something, was standing right beside me. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to locate the source, but the darkness offered no clues, only the overwhelming sensation of being watched. I nudged Sarah, whispering my unease. She listened intently, her brow furrowing as the breathing continued, now unmistakably close. Mike and Jenna exchanged worried glances, while Alex remained silent, his eyes scanning the perimeter of our campsite. "Guys, do you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. They nodded, the tension palpable as the breathing persisted, now accompanied by faint whispers that seemed to slither through the air. The fire flickered, casting elongated shadows that seemed to reach out towards us, as if the forest itself was trying to communicate or warn us. Suddenly, the breathing stopped. A heavy silence reclaimed the night, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. We sat in stunned silence, the fear lingering like a thick fog. Deciding to stay vigilant, we turned off our flashlights, hoping to drift back to sleep. But the respite was short-lived. Around 2 a.m., the breathing resumed, louder and more urgent this time. It was followed by a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the trees. Panic surged through me as I realized we were not alone. Shadows moved at the edge of the firelight, shapes taking form among the redwoods. My mind raced, grappling with the possibility of wildlife or something far more sinister. "Wake up," I hissed, shaking Mike awake. "We need to get out of here." But as we prepared to abandon our tents, we noticed something horrifying. All our belongings had been disturbed, tents torn open, supplies scattered, and personal items strewn across the clearing. Amid the chaos, the ground was littered with footprints that didn't match any of ours. They were too large, too deep, with an unearthly quality that sent chills down my spine. Alex, usually the most composed of us, was visibly shaken. "We need to leave now," he urged, his voice trembling. We hastily packed what we could, but the forest seemed to conspire against us. Every direction we chose led us deeper into the labyrinth of redwoods, the path we had taken now obscured by an impenetrable darkness. The breathing and whispers intensified, surrounding us, as if the forest itself was alive and intent on keeping us within its grasp. As hours turned into what felt like an eternity, exhaustion and fear gnawed at us. We stumbled through the underbrush, guided only by the faint light of our flashlights and the desperate hope of finding our way back. But the forest was a maze, its ancient trees shifting and rearranging, making any sense of direction impossible. Just as hope began to wane, the first light of dawn pierced through the canopy, offering a glimmer of salvation. We pressed on, driven by sheer desperation, until we finally broke through the dense foliage and emerged onto a familiar trail. The sunrise bathed the forest in golden light, dispelling the night's horrors and revealing the path back to civilization. We didn't speak much on the way back, each lost in our own thoughts, the memories of that night seared into our minds. When we finally reached the edge of the redwood forest, the sense of relief was overwhelming. We collapsed onto the pavement of the nearby highway, gasping for breath, the reality of our survival sinking in. In the days that followed, we shared our story with friends and family, but no one believed us. To them, it was just a tale of overactive imaginations and stress from a demanding job. But for us, the experience was a haunting reminder of the forest's dark secrets. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved into the history of the redwood forest, seeking answers to the unexplainable events of that night. What I discovered was chilling, tales of disappearances and unexplained phenomena that had plagued the area for decades. Locals spoke in hushed tones about restless spirits and ancient curses, stories that were dismissed as folklore but held a kernel of truth. One story, in particular, stood out. It spoke of a tragic event that occurred over 100 years ago, where a group of settlers had attempted to carve out a path through the forest, only to be met with relentless resistance. The forest seemed to fight back, claiming the lives of those who dared to trespass too deeply. Ever since, the redwood forest had been known as a place where the boundary between the living and the dead was perilously thin. Armed with this knowledge, I realized that our encounter was more than just a random freak accident. It was a manifestation of the forest's lingering anger and sorrow. The breathing and whispers were not just sounds, they were the voices of those who had been lost, trapped between worlds, unable to find peace. Determined to honor their memory and perhaps find some closure for ourselves, my friends and I decided to return to the redwood forest. This time, we came prepared, not just with gear, but with respect and reverence for the place that had nearly claimed our lives. We chose a new campsite, deeper into the forest but with a clear intention to coexist peacefully. As night fell, we set up our tents and built a modest fire, mindful of our surroundings. The night was quiet, the usual sounds of the forest muted under the dense canopy. But as midnight approached, a familiar sensation of being watched crept over us. The breathing began again, softer this time, more rhythmic. Instead of fear, a sense of calm washed over me. We sat together, acknowledging the presence around us, offering silent apologies for our intrusion. The whispers returned, but now they felt like murmurs of gratitude, rather than threats. As the night wore on, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a serene stillness. It was as if the forest had accepted our presence, granting us permission to coexist. The spirits, once restless and vengeful, seemed to find solace in our acknowledgement. By dawn, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the redwoods, illuminating the path back to our original campsite. We packed up our gear, feeling a profound sense of connection to the forest and its ancient inhabitants. The journey back was peaceful, the forest no longer a maze, but a guide leading us home. In the weeks that followed, life returned to normal, but the experience left an indelible mark on all of us. We often found ourselves drawn back to the redwood forest, seeking to understand more about its mysteries and the spirits that called it home. Our story became a testament to the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown, a reminder to tread lightly and respect the places that hold the echoes of the past. Years later, I still visit the redwood forest, each trip a pilgrimage to honor the spirits we encountered. The breathing and whispers have become familiar sounds, no longer feared but respected as part of the forest's enduring legacy. The redwood forest remains a place of beauty and mystery, where the living and the dead coexist in a delicate balance, each night bringing new stories whispered among the ancient trees. Story number 4. Silent Town. I always had a fascination with abandoned places, their eerie silence, the stories they held, and the mysteries they whispered through decaying walls and overgrown paths. So when I stumbled upon references to a deserted town near the Arizona border named Silent Town, I knew I had to visit. As a documentary filmmaker, capturing the essence of forgotten places was my passion. Little did I know, Silent Town would offer me a story far darker than I could have ever imagined. The journey to Silent Town was longer than expected. I drove through vast stretches of desert, the landscape stretching endlessly under the scorching sun. By the time I approached the town, dusk was settling in, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out like ghostly fingers. The sign marking Silent Town was barely legible, its paint peeling in letters faded by years of neglect. As I parked my old Jeep near what remained of the town's main street, an unsettling stillness enveloped me. No birds chirped, no wind rustled the trees, and not a single sound broke the silence. It was as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone to disturb its eternal quiet. I set up my camera equipment, eager to document the desolate beauty of Silent Town. The buildings stood as hollowed shells of their former selves, windows broken, doors hanging off hinges, and storefronts covered in grime. I walked through the streets, narrating my observations, my voice echoing eerily in the void. As night fell, I decided to capture some footage under the moonlight. The darkness seemed to grow thicker, swallowing the light of my flashlight and the glow of my camera. I set up my tripod in what once was the town's central square, the remnants of a fountain now just a shadow against the night sky. I began recording, my camera capturing the empty streets and the oppressive silence that pressed in from all sides. Minutes turned into hours, and the only sounds were the soft hum of my equipment and the distant call of an unseen night creature. Just as I was about to call it a night, my camera began to act up. It started turning on and off by itself, the screen flickering with static before stabilizing. Curiosity piqued, I approached the camera to inspect it. As I touched the power button, the screen went black. I tried restarting it, but it refused to cooperate. Frustrated, I packed up my gear, deciding to call it a night despite the strange behavior of my equipment. Sleep was elusive that first night. I lay awake in my tent, the darkness outside impenetrable. Every so often, I heard faint noises, distant whispers, the creak of old wood, and the soft thud of something moving nearby. I convinced myself it was just the natural sounds of the forest, amplified by my heightened senses. The next morning, I reviewed the footage from the previous night. What I saw sent a chill down my spine. Shadows moved across the screen, figures appearing and disappearing within the frame. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light or a malfunctioning camera, but the movements were too deliberate, too human-like. Faces blurred and distorted, their expressions twisted in silent screams. Determined to uncover the truth, I spent the day exploring more of Silent Town, speaking to locals at the nearest small town a few miles away. They spoke of the town's abrupt abandonment years ago, rumors of strange occurrences, and a pervasive sense of dread that lingered long after people left. One old man, his face etched with lines of sorrow, warned me sternly, some places are better left alone. They hold secrets that man shouldn't uncover. But my curiosity was insatiable. That night, back in Silent Town, I decided to conduct a nighttime interview, hoping to capture more evidence of the town's haunted past. As I set up my camera in the same central square, the temperature dropped sharply, the air growing thick with an invisible presence. I began asking questions into the darkness, my voice steady despite the growing unease. "Is anyone here with me?" I called out, the camera capturing the empty streets. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the camera began to malfunction again, turning on and off, the screen flickering erratically. I tried to fix it, but the device seemed possessed, responding to an unseen force. Through the chaos, I caught glimpses of movement, shadows flitting between buildings, figures standing just out of sight. My heart raced as I realized I wasn't alone. The oppressive silence was broken by faint whispers, growing louder and more insistent. "Leave now," they seemed to say, "before it's too late." I felt a presence behind me, cold and heavy, pressing against my back. I spun around, but no one was there. The whispers turned into soft, desperate pleas. "Don't stay," they urged. Panic surged through me as I grabbed my camera and fled, stumbling through the dark streets, the feeling of being watched intensifying with every step. As I reached the edge of town, I dared to glance back. Through my camera's lens, I saw a figure standing at the end of the street, tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Before I could react, the figure raised a hand, and the camera captured a final, horrifying image, my own face, contorted in sheer terror, staring back at me through the lens. I never returned to Silent Town, but the nightmare didn't end there. A year later, during a follow-up investigation, local authorities discovered my abandoned Jeep near the outskirts of Silent Town. Inside, they found my camera lying on the passenger seat, the footage eerily replaying the events of that fateful night. The final frame showed my terrified face, eyes wide with fear, before the screen went black. Rumors spread quickly. Some said my spirit was now trapped within Silent Town, forever reliving the horror I had documented. Others believed the town had claimed another soul, adding to its haunted legacy. I couldn't help but wonder if the whispers I heard were warnings from beyond, echoes of those who had tried to uncover Silent Town's secrets and paid the ultimate price. To this day, the footage remains a chilling reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. Silent Town stands as a testament to the dangers of probing too deeply into the unknown, a place where silence holds more secrets than words ever could. And as I reflect on that night, I realize that some mysteries are best left unsolved, their silence preserved in the shadows of forgotten places. Story number 5. Cornfield of Shadows. I never believed in ghost stories or local legends. Growing up in Kansas, surrounded by endless cornfields and tight-knit communities, I always thought such tales were just the fabric of small-town imagination. That was until the night my friends and I ventured into the heart of the cornfield known ominously as the Cornfield of Shadows. It was the summer of my junior year, a time when adolescence meets recklessness. My friends, Mike, Sarah, Jenna, and Alex, were always up for an adventure, and that night, fueled by boredom and the thrill of the unknown, we decided to test the legend ourselves. The Cornfield of Shadows was infamous around town for its dense, maze-like rows of corn that seemed to shift and change under the cover of darkness. Locals whispered about strange occurrences, eerie sounds, fleeting shadows, and even disappearances. Most dismissed these stories as nothing more than exaggerated tales, but curiosity got the better of us. We met at Mike's house just after sunset, armed with flashlights, cameras, and a sense of invincibility. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced among the towering stalks of corn. The air was thick with the scent of earth and ripening maize, a quintessential Kansas evening. As we approached the entrance to the cornfield, a dense fog began to roll in, enveloping us in a ghostly embrace. "Are we sure about this?" Jenna asked, her voice wavering slightly. She was usually the bravest among us, but the fog made everything feel surreal, almost otherworldly. "Come on, Jenna." "It's just a cornfield," Mike replied, trying to mask his own unease with a chuckle. "Nothing's going to happen to us." We pressed forward, the corn towering above us like silent sentinels. The rows were thick, creating a natural labyrinth that seemed impossible to navigate once darkness fully settled in. Our flashlights pierced the darkness, revealing the endless green maze that stretched out in every direction. The further we went, the more the corn seemed to close in, the air growing colder and the silence more oppressive. As we walked, the corn rustled softly, but no wind stirred the leaves. It was as if the field itself was alive, watching us with unseen eyes. We joked nervously, trying to keep the tension from creeping into our conversations. Mike led the way, camera in hand, capturing the eerie beauty of the corn under the moonlight. "Check this out," Alex called, pointing his flashlight towards a small clearing. In the center stood an old, dilapidated scarecrow, its tattered clothes flapping in the still air. The scarecrow's face was worn away, leaving only a hollow, menacing presence that seemed to follow us as we moved. "Creepy," Sarah whispered, edging closer to take a photo. As she raised her camera, a shadow darted across the screen, too fast to identify. We all froze, eyes wide, listening for any sign of movement. "Probably just a deer," Mike suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. We resumed walking, but the sense of being watched never left us. Every rustle and snap of a stalk set our nerves on edge. By the time we reached the heart of the cornfield, the fog had thickened, reducing visibility to mere feet. The corn rows twisted and turned, making it impossible to see where we were going. It was easy to lose track of each other in the dense maze. We decided to split up, believing that two pairs would cover more ground and find our way out faster. I paired up with Jenna, while Mike and Sarah took Alex. The separation felt strange, a sudden vulnerability that heightened our fear. Jenna and I walked hand in hand, the shadows around us seeming to dance and whisper. The corn loomed high above, creating an almost impenetrable barrier that separated us from the rest of the group. "Do you hear that?" Jenna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" I replied, my own heart pounding in my chest. "Breathing," she said, her eyes darting around nervously. "Heavy, like someone's right behind us." I strained my ears, but all I could hear was the rhythmic sound of my own breathing and the occasional rustle of the corn. We quickened our pace, trying to find a way out, but the corn seemed to mock us, leading us deeper into its dark embrace. Meanwhile, Mike, Sarah, and Alex were facing their own horrors. They had taken a slightly different path, hoping to find a landmark to guide them back. Instead, they encountered a series of unsettling sights, shadows moving just beyond the reach of their flashlights, strange noises echoing through the field, and an overwhelming sense of dread that weighed them down. As the night wore on, Jenna and I became increasingly disoriented. The corn seemed to shift, the paths we took looping back on themselves like the corridors of a haunted house. We stopped to catch our breath, the silence around us oppressive. It was then that we heard it, a faint, eerie whisper carried on the wind. "Leave now," it seemed to say, the words barely audible but filled with a sense of urgency. "Did you hear that?" I asked, clutching Jenna's hand tightly. She nodded, her face pale. "We need to get out of here." But as we tried to retrace our steps, the cornfield seemed to conspire against us. Paths vanished, landmarks disappeared, and the fog thickened, swallowing us in its cold embrace. Panic set in as we realized we were lost, with no way to find our friends or escape the maze. Back with Mike, Sarah, and Alex, the situation was no better. They stumbled upon a small, abandoned farmhouse, the windows boarded up and the door hanging loosely. Desperate for shelter and a place to regroup, they decided to take refuge inside. The interior was dark and musty, filled with remnants of a long-forgotten life. They set up camp for the night, hoping to find a way out in the morning. But sleep was elusive. Strange noises echoed through the house, faint whispers, footsteps in empty rooms, and the distant sound of crying. Alex, always the skeptic, tried to rationalize the sounds, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Around midnight, they heard a loud crash from upstairs. Armed with flashlights, they cautiously made their way to the staircase, only to find the second floor empty. As they descended back to the ground floor, a shadow flitted across the wall, moving too quickly to be human. Fear gripped them, and they huddled together, unable to move. Meanwhile, Jenna and I were no closer to finding our way out. The whispering voices grew louder, more insistent, urging us to leave. "Don't stay," they seemed to say. But the cornfield was unyielding, each path leading us deeper into its dark heart. As dawn approached, a faint light began to filter through the corn, signaling the end of the night's terror. Jenna and I stumbled out of the cornfield, exhausted and traumatized, only to find our friends waiting for us. Relief washed over us as we reunited, sharing our individual horrors and the eerie sensations we had experienced. But the relief was short-lived. We noticed that Alex was missing. Panic set in as we searched frantically, calling out his name, but there was no sign of him. The first rays of sunlight revealed his absence, and our hearts sank. We retraced our steps, but the cornfield had changed overnight, the paths we had taken now twisted and unfamiliar. By noon, we were back at the abandoned farmhouse, desperate for any clue to find Alex. We found his backpack lying on the floor, but there was no sign of him. As we sat in the dim light, Sarah suddenly stood up, her face contorted in fear. "There," she pointed towards the window. We followed her gaze and saw Alex sitting motionless in the middle of the cornfield, his eyes blank and lifeless. He was staring directly at us, murmuring incoherently. "Alex!" I cried, rushing towards him. But as I reached out to touch him, he collapsed, still muttering the same haunting words, "Don't let them find you." We managed to carry him back to the farmhouse, but his condition only worsened. He was unresponsive, his eyes glazed over with an empty stare. The whispering voices seemed to surround us, growing louder and more aggressive, demanding that we leave before it was too late. Desperate and terrified, we decided to flee the farmhouse, abandoning our equipment and any hope of finding Alex alive. We ran through the cornfield, the oppressive darkness pressing in on us once more. The whispering voices chased us, urging us to escape before the morning light. As we sprinted towards the edge of the cornfield, the fog began to lift, revealing the first hints of daylight. The corn seemed to retreat, the oppressive presence weakening with the coming dawn. We emerged from the field, breathless and broken, the silence of the morning a stark contrast to the horrors of the night. But our ordeal was far from over. Alex was never found, and his disappearance became another chapter in the dark legend of the cornfield of shadows. We reported the incident to the authorities, but the vast expanse of the cornfield offered no clues, no signs of struggle, nothing to explain what had happened to him. In the months that followed, each of us was haunted by the memories of that night. Jenna and I struggled with survivor's guilt, Sarah dealt with sleepless nights, and Mike retreated into himself, unable to speak about what had transpired. The cornfield of shadows had left an indelible mark on our lives, a constant reminder of the thin veil between reality and the unknown. Determined to find answers, I decided to delve deeper into the history of the cornfield. What I discovered was chilling. Silent Town, the abandoned settlement near the cornfield, had a dark past. It was a place where families had settled decades ago, only to abandon it abruptly after a series of unexplained deaths and disappearances. Theories ranged from natural disasters to supernatural curses, but nothing was ever confirmed. Local legends spoke of restless spirits trapped within the cornfield, seeking vengeance or release from their eternal limbo. Some believed that the corn itself was cursed, a living entity that thrived on fear and despair, luring unsuspecting souls into its maze to feed its dark hunger. Armed with this knowledge, I knew that our encounter was no random act of nature. It was a manifestation of the cornfield's malevolent spirit, a force that preyed on the living, ensnaring them in its eternal maze. The whispering voices, the shadows, and Alex's haunting disappearance were all signs of the field's insatiable appetite for fear and souls. One evening, a year after our harrowing experience, I returned to Silent Town and the cornfield of shadows. This time, I was alone, determined to uncover the truth and perhaps find a way to lay the restless spirits to rest. Equipped with my camera, notes, and a deep sense of purpose, I ventured into the cornfield, the sun setting on the horizon and casting long shadows that seemed to welcome me into their fold. As darkness fell, the cornfield transformed into a living nightmare once more. The fog rolled in, thick and impenetrable, and the oppressive silence enveloped me. I set up my camera in the central clearing, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. Hours passed with no unusual activity, but as midnight approached, the familiar sounds began, whispers and distant cries that echoed through the corn. I called out, my voice trembling but resolute, "If there are spirits here, I mean no harm. I'm here to help you find peace." The camera began to flicker, and shadows danced at the edge of my vision. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, a woman in a flowing white dress, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. She stood before me, her presence both haunting and pitiable. "Help us," she whispered, her voice echoing with the pain of countless lost souls. "Find the path to peace." I felt a surge of determination. "I'll do whatever it takes to help you." The whispers grew louder, guiding me deeper into the cornfield. I followed the voices, the shadows parting to reveal a hidden path through the maze. As I walked, the camera captured fleeting images of spirits, families, children, and solitary figures, each trapped in their eternal torment. In the heart of the cornfield, I discovered an old, overgrown shrine, the remnants of a forgotten ritual meant to appease the restless spirits. It was clear that the town had attempted to placate the forces that haunted the cornfield, but something had gone horribly wrong, leaving the spirits trapped in an endless cycle of suffering. I knew what I had to do. Using the notes I had gathered, I performed a ritual of my own, hoping to break the curse that bound the spirits to the cornfield. As I chanted the ancient words, the air grew thick with energy, the spirits converging around me in a swirling vortex of light and shadow. With one final incantation, I felt a release, a surge of power that pushed back against the darkness. The spirits let out a unified cry, their forms dissolving into the night as peace finally settled over the cornfield. The oppressive presence lifted, and the corn seemed to stand tall and proud, no longer twisted by malevolence. As dawn broke, the fog dissipated, revealing the cornfield in its full, majestic glory. I felt a sense of accomplishment and relief, knowing that I had helped the restless spirits find peace. The camera captured the serene beauty of the cornfield, a stark contrast to the horrors of the night. I left Silent Town and the cornfield of shadows behind, my heart heavy with the memories of that night, but also lightened by the knowledge that I had made a difference. The experience had changed me, deepening my understanding of the unseen forces that linger just beyond our perception and the importance of compassion and respect for those who had been lost. But the story didn't end there. The legend of the cornfield of shadows grew, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of friendship and courage. Our ordeal became a cautionary tale, a reminder that some places hold secrets that are best left undisturbed, and that the line between reality and the supernatural is thinner than we might ever imagine. To this day, I carry the lessons learned from that night, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the mysteries that lie hidden in the heart of the Kansas cornfields. And sometimes, when the wind rustles through the stalks, I hear the faint whispers of the past, a lingering echo of the souls we helped to free, forever entwined with the cornfield of shadows.